Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about a recent statement in the US, saying that America is making the world more dangerous. Also, Iran missed the chance to buy the J-10 fighter jets, because at the time the West claimed that Chinese planes were too heavily copied. But now, the media is saying that China is leading in innovation, while the US is just following and imitating. As for the situation with the US president, Trump is still hesitating and hasn't decided whether to support Israel in targeting Iran's Fordow nuclear facility, which is buried 90 meters underground. With war between Israel and Iran, Iran has lost air superiority. Israeli fighter jets are flying near Tehran, the capital, as if no one's stopping them. Is Iran really in such a situation? This is the consequence of a pro-American military mindset, including missing out on Chinese fighter jets. Iran's most advanced fighter jets are the F-14A Tomcats before the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty in 1979. These planes are over 50 years old. US sanctions on Iran made it harder to get spare parts, making maintenance extremely costly. Facing Israel's 45 F-35 stealth fighters, Iran is completely on the defensive, just taking hits. Recently, during the air combat between Pakistan and India, Pakistan used China's J-10 fighter jets to launch PL-15 medium-range missiles, which locked onto India's French-made Rafale fighters. The incident immediately made headlines. This reminds people of when China's J-10 fighter jet made its debut at the Zhuhai Airshow in 2008. At that time, the outside world believed the most likely buyers would be Pakistan and Iran. As for the outcome, Pakistan ended up buying the J-10 fighter jets, while Iran never made a purchase. On November 6, 2008, the Wall Street Journal published a commentary titled China's Public Performance, which mentioned that at the Zhuhai Airshow, J-10 fighter pilots performed a series of high-difficulty maneuvers, such as sharp turns, vertical climbs, and 360-degree spins, in an attempt to impress the audience. The Wall Street Journal said the message China was sending was very clear. It was that China's military era had already arrived, and it was coming fast. However, at the time, the Wall Street Journal also pointed out that China was not yet a genuine military superpower. Many of the advanced technologies showcased at the Zhuhai Airshow were actually copied from foreign technologies, and there were very few technologies that truly came from China's own independent research. Looking back now, it really feels like those comments from the American media 17 years ago were ridiculous and laughable. Today, China already has two sixth-generation fighter jets making appearances, while America's sixth-generation jets are still just drawings on PowerPoint slides. Also, back then, there were Western commentators who claimed that China's J-10 fighter jet had over 50 issues. These kinds of comments probably influenced Iran's decision not to purchase the J-10. Iranian pilots were used to flying F-14 fighter jets, and at that time, there were quite a few people in the Tehran military who were pretty westernized, so of course they looked down on China's J-10. However, if Iran had purchased a large number of J-10 fighter jets back then, even though they would still lag behind America's F-35s, with the protection of the J-10's PL-15 medium-range missiles, it's likely they wouldn't have just left their airspace wide open and handed air superiority over to Israel. Many Westerners misjudged China's development at the time, and the current situation is something they never could have imagined. Recently, the Financial Times published an article saying that with the rise of deep-sea technology, China is leading innovation, while the US is merely following suit. The article says that China's AI large model, DeepSeek, has made breakthroughs in AI reasoning, challenging the US's technological leadership, reshaping the market landscape, and highlighting China's continuously innovative role amid geopolitical and economic uncertainties. As a result, the market value of US tech stocks related to this sector once evaporated by $1 trillion, with investors beginning to reassess to what extent DeepSeek will impact the US-dominated AI industry that has been the foundation for years. According to financial market reports, the rise of DeepSeek, in addition to its economic impact, could break the long-standing stereotype that portrays China as lacking originality and only capable of imitation. Similar to Silicon Valley startups, DeepSeek values research, employs talent educated in China, and promotes a spirit of exploration, rather than simply pursuing commercial interests. Unlike OpenAI and Google, which rely on proprietary models, DeepSeek is based on open-source frameworks and focuses on language models. This should allow it to develop advanced reasoning capabilities at a much lower cost than its American competitors. However, some politicians have raised concerns about its safety and intellectual property. Its rival, OpenAI, has even accused DeepSeek of possible intellectual property infringement. This accusation is rather ironic, considering that OpenAI itself is facing legal challenges over copyright issues. The Financial Times stated that the success of TIS demonstrates the strength of China's generative AI innovation sector, showcasing the country's ability to drive technological breakthroughs even under a constantly evolving regulatory environment. Its rapid adoption and widespread popularity, including becoming the most popular free app on the Apple App Store, not only solidify China's growing influence in the field of artificial intelligence, it signals that the global tech landscape is undergoing profound changes. To put it simply, the old Western narrative that China is always lagging behind in technology and just copying others is no longer valid. Iran, too, may have missed out on the J-10 fighter jets and China's air defense missile technology because of being influenced by such propaganda, and now Iran is paying a heavy price for it. J-10 fighter jets delivered impressive combat results, silencing critics who claimed China lacked real-world experience. That wasn't the case. From EVs, lithium batteries, and solar cells to 6th-gen fighter jets and developing deep learning large models, China has made significant strides. In one field after another, China has achieved the leap from catching up to taking the lead. If you miss out on China's development achievements, you'll miss out on many opportunities. Thirdly, Iran's problem is that there are still many pro-American people within the country, but the reality is that even if you're pro-American, America isn't pro-you. Recently, Bloomberg published an article by Stavridis, a retired U.S. Navy admiral and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, now Vice Chairman for Global Affairs at the Carlyle Group. When he talks about security issues, he carries a certain authority. It was the U.S. that made the whole world a more dangerous place. Stavridis put it this way: 10 years ago, during what was called America's endless wars abroad, every morning Stavridis was afraid to walk into his office, worried he would hear bad news from the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. As the military commander of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, he was responsible for commanding the daily operations of more than 150,000 American and international troops. During those 4 years there, nearly 2,000 young people lost their lives in combat, mainly because of repeated attacks by improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. These are bombs made using unconventional, often makeshift materials and methods. The term IED still haunts his dreams. Now, as he witnesses President Trump's first few months in office and his interactions with a world full of skepticism, Trump leaving the G7 summit early this week almost every time he avoids causing a major diplomatic incident, it's already something worth celebrating. The acronym IED, for improvised explosive device, pops up in his mind again. The emerging Trumpism feels like an IED itself, ready to trigger a crisis at any moment. IED is actually the perfect word to accurately describe the dangers of Trumpism. But I stands for Trump's insistence on the America First policy, trying to reduce or even cut off America's engagement with international organizations, especially those under the United Nations. Trump believes that America can thrive independently, in essence, that the U.S. can grow here, extract resources here, manufacture here, educate here, and invent here. When it comes to vast, beautiful marine conservation areas, the U.S. lets the military withdraw. In his view, this thinking isn't new in American history. The U.S. has long been disconnected from the world. Early American presidents like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, over 2 centuries ago, warned America not to get entangled in overseas alliances. Isolationism was the dominant force in American foreign policy in the 1930s. The United States paid a heavy price for this during World War II. What's different now is that America is suddenly threatening to abandon NATO, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and even Ukraine's struggle against Russia. In other words, it might abandon the post-war international order it helped build, an order that once brought huge benefits to Washington. To understand the internal contradictions of isolationism, it's worth taking a look inside the Make America Great Again movement led by Trump. Is it the internal war of words over whether to support Israel? In these new types of improvised explosive devices, the E stands for instability. Most international systems, diplomatic, economic, trade, and military, can withstand a certain degree of unexpected events and sudden shocks. But Trumpism, taking Nixon's madman theory to the extreme, has significantly expanded this concept. A weak government tries to create an atmosphere of instability in international affairs. In other words, America's unpredictability must be respected and appeased, so that the US can gain special advantages. But this kind of erratic decision-making has already reached a level that the system simply can't withstand. The Deng administration's tariff policy is a perfect example. Starting from Liberation Day in April, or as he called it, Demolition Day, there's been a dizzying series of flip-flopping decisions, which are now starting to have the opposite effect of what was intended. Even his main achievements in property, and the agreements reached with the UK, are limited in scope, and some negotiations are still unfinished. You impose tariffs to punish allies, friends, partners, and competitors, then later withdraw these trade penalties due to geopolitical situations, domestic political pressure, or just plain confusion. This leads America's competitors to either keep waiting to negotiate with the US, while America's friends are starting to leave and look for other options. Then comes the third D. D stands for division. He's worried about the isolation and unpredictability these policies bring. Although these policies can ultimately be reversed, unfortunately, the divisions sown between the US and its closest allies are irreversible. In Brussels, Paris, London, Berlin, Warsaw, and other European capitals, policymakers see a transatlantic bridge collapsing, falling into a cold and unforgiving ocean. Next week's summit is crucial. Will the EU, before Trump decides to dissolve NATO, take the lead in establishing a security alliance covering the entire European continent without US involvement? Will they invite Canada and Mexico to join a new transatlantic security and free trade zone? The answer might very well be yes. Europeans are already significantly increasing their defense spending and building up their own industrial base. It's true, it's time for Europeans to take on greater security responsibilities. But if they go it alone and work exclusively with European manufacturers, it will deal a heavy blow to American defense contractors, who currently provide most of the advanced military systems to these countries. So, now that we've identified Trump's improvised explosive device, is there anything we can actually do about it? In terms of isolating this issue, a big part of the solution lies in the fact that leaders of foreign allies and friendly countries around the world must realize that, in the context of Trump taking office, the world is filled with power plays, deal-making, and flattery, while principles become meaningless. And that is truly regrettable. However, when it comes to America's unpredictable behavior, there's very little we can actually do. This stems from Trump's unique decision-making style. The rest of the world needs to accept this sudden and dynamic reality, which is, in essence, the tactical strategy of the current US administration. For them, it's a necessity at heart. Overreacting to America's first round of attacks would be a mistake. As he said, back in the 19th century during the height of the British Empire, Prime Minister Palmerston once said, "We have no eternal allies, nor eternal enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and it is our duty to safeguard these interests." Palmerston's idea that self-interest comes above all else sums up Trump's approach to international relations quite well, and it's fair to summarize it this way. First, Thucydides was the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and he deeply understood the benefits that establishing NATO brought to the United States, while Trump is now in the process of dismantling it. Second, Trump himself is like an improvised explosive device. He's extremely dangerous to allies. His actions have damaged the relationships between the US and its allies, and it will be very difficult to repair them.
Third, an isolated US is a boon for China.